The laughter came first. Sharp, sudden, cruel. It sliced through the room before Grace even understood what was happening. 1 second she was standing there, holding her cleaning cloth, trying to make herself small like she always did. The next second, the sound hit her like a slap. Not loud enough to be playful, not soft enough to ignore. It was the kind of laughter meant to remind someone exactly where they stood. The room went quiet right after. Not the gentle quiet of respect, but the heavy quiet that presses down on your chest and makes your ears ring. Marble floors stretched wide beneath crystal chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars. Everything in that mansion gleamed. Wealth lived in every corner. Money sat in the walls, in the air, in the way the room smelled polished and cold. And standing in the middle of all that shine was Grace. Grace was a black maid with tired eyes. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind that comes from waking up before the sun and lying down long after dark. Her uniform was clean, ironed. Her hair pulled back neat and tight. But her shoes told a different story. The soles were worn thin. The leather cracked at the edges. Shoes that had walked bus routes and long hallways. Shoes that had carried her through years of work where thank yous were rare and respect even rarer. The woman of the house leaned forward on the velvet couch, covering her mouth like she was trying to be polite, but her eyes gave her away. They dragged slowly from Grace's face down to her feet, lingering, judging, measuring. Then she laughed again, softer this time, like a secret shared with someone who already agreed. The man didn't bother hiding it at all. He leaned back, one arm stretched across the couch, smirk pulling at his lips. He shook his head slowly, like he was disappointed, like Grace had personally failed him by existing in front of him. "Did you really think you could walk into our home wearing those?" he said. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were sharp enough on their own. Grace felt them hit her chest and sink in deep. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand. The fabric twisted as her grip shook. She kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago that eye contact could be dangerous. That silence was safer. That answering back only made things worse. She had heard insults before. At other houses. Other jobs. Other rooms that smelled like money she would never touch. But this one felt different. This one didn't slide off her skin. It stayed. Heavy. Personal. Like every no she'd ever heard stacked into one moment. Like every door closed in her face replaying all at once. The woman waved her hand in the air, dismissing Grace like she was dust. "Honestly," she said, voice dripping with boredom. "People like you should know your place. People like you." The words landed harder than the laughter. Grace felt her throat tighten. She swallowed slowly. Her chest burned, but she didn't let it show. She lowered her head just enough to signal obedience. Just enough to survive the moment. Silence filled the room again. Long, thick, uncomfortable. It stretched on until it felt louder than the laughter ever had. The kind of silence that lets cruelty echo. The kind that forces you to sit with what was said, with what was meant, with what could not be taken back. Grace stood still. Too still. Her body had learned this freeze over years of moments like this. Her mind drifted somewhere safer. To mornings when she tied her shoes in the dark so she wouldn't wake her son. To nights when she rubbed her feet raw and aching, wondering how much longer they could carry her. To all the times she told herself, just get through today. The man cleared his throat, irritated by the quiet. He stood up and walked closer. Each step echoed off the marble floor, loud and deliberate. He stopped just short of Grace, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Expensive, sharp, unfamiliar. "Be grateful," he said, his voice lower now. "We're giving you a chance." A chance. Grace nodded once. Small. Controlled. She kept her eyes on the floor. Inside, something twisted. A chance, they called it. As if dignity was a favor. As if survival was a gift handed down by people who had never gone without. The woman stood and adjusted her silk robe, clearly finished with the moment. "Clean the kitchen next," she said. "And don't scuff the floors." Grace turned toward the hallway, her steps quiet, careful. Each footfall felt heavier than the last. Her shoes whispered against the marble like an apology she never got to hear back. Then the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the air, sharp and sudden. Grace froze mid-step. Her heart skipped. Once. Twice. The woman frowned, annoyed. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked, eyes narrowing. Grace hesitated for half a second, just long enough to feel the weight of everything she'd swallowed rise up in her chest. Then she nodded softly. Yes, she said. The man scoffed. Answer it. And make it quick. Grace walked to the door. Her hand hovered over the handle for a moment. She took a breath. A deep one. The kind you take before stepping into something you can't turn back from. When she opened the door, the air shifted. A tall black man stood on the other side. His suit was tailored sharp. Dark. Clean lines. He stood straight, calm eyes steady, leather briefcase resting at his side. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He didn't look past her like she wasn't there. He looked directly at her. Good afternoon, he said. His voice was even, grounded, strong. Grace stepped aside and let him in. The moment he crossed the threshold, the room felt different. The laughter from earlier felt far away now. Smaller. The woman straightened. The man narrowed his eyes, confused. Who are you? The woman asked. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, holding it between two fingers. I'm here on behalf of Grace, he said calmly. Grace felt her spine straighten without her meaning to. The man on the couch laughed once, short and sharp. This is a joke, right? The visitor didn't react. He placed the card gently on the table. Attorney at law. The silence that followed was not cruel. It was tense, charged, heavy with something new, something dangerous. Grace stood there, hands still, heart pounding, as the power in the room began to tilt. They didn't know it yet. They couldn't see it yet. But the laughter that once filled that mansion had reached its final echo. And as Grace looked down at her worn shoes one last time, she realized something had already changed. The humiliation they thought was the end of her story was only the beginning. Grace kept working. That was the part that hurt the most. Her hands moved on their own, slow and steady, wiping the marble countertop in small circles like she'd done 1,000 times before. The cloth glided over a surface so smooth it reflected the chandelier lights above. Her eyes stayed low. Her shoulders stayed tight. Her face stayed calm. No screaming. No arguing. No tears. Just quiet motion in a room that had already decided she didn't matter. Behind her, the couple kept talking. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't pause. They spoke freely, casually, like Grace was just another piece of furniture. Like the expensive couch or the glass table. Present, but invisible. Honestly, the woman scoffed, her voice sharp and bored. I don't even understand how they let people like her apply. Grace felt the words before she fully heard them. A heat climbed up her chest, fast and sudden, pressing against her ribs like it wanted to escape. Years of swallowed anger rose together, heavy and thick. Every insult she'd ignored. Every smile she'd forced. Every time she'd told herself, just keep going. She needed this job. That truth wrapped itself around her throat and squeezed. She needed the money. Rent didn't wait for pride. Bills didn't care about respect. Her son's school shoes were already getting tight, and winter was coming. Dignity felt important, but dignity didn't keep the lights on. That was the lie she'd been taught to live with. She wiped the counter harder than she meant to, then softened her touch. She had learned control the hard way. The man stood up behind her. She felt him before she saw him. His shadow fell across the counter, dark and heavy. His footsteps were slow as he walked closer. Too close. He stopped just behind her shoulder, invading the small space she'd carved out for herself. Be grateful, he said quietly. His voice was low, almost calm, like he was offering advice. We're giving you a chance. A chance. The words echoed in Grace's head. A chance to clean their messes. A chance to be laughed at in her worn shoes. A chance to swallow her pride one more day. She nodded once. Small. Controlled. The kind of nod that said I hear you without saying you agree. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. It was survival. It was knowing when to hold on and when to wait. The man stepped back, satisfied. The woman sighed and checked her phone, already bored again. Grace moved toward the kitchen sink, her footsteps soft, careful not to scuff the floor. The room felt tighter now, smaller, like the walls were leaning in. Then the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the air clean and sharp, like a knife slicing tension open. Grace froze mid-step. Her fingers tightened around the cloth. Her heart skipped, so hard it almost hurt. The woman frowned, annoyed by the interruption. Are you expecting someone? She asked, her tone already irritated. Grace stood still. The room felt like it was holding its breath. For a moment, she thought about lying, about saying no, about pushing this moment away like she'd pushed everything else away. But something inside her settled. Yes, she said softly. The couple exchanged looks. The man rolled his eyes. Unbelievable, he muttered. He pointed toward the door. Answer it. And make it quick. Grace walked toward the front door, every step steady, even though her pulse raced. Her hand hovered over the handle again, just like before. She inhaled slowly. The air felt different this time. Heavier. Charged. She opened the door. A tall black man stood there, framed by the afternoon light. He wore a dark tailored suit that fit him perfectly, sharp lines and clean edges. His posture was straight, confident, calm. A leather briefcase rested at his side like it belonged there. His eyes were steady and kind, but serious. Good afternoon, he said evenly. Grace stepped aside without a word. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air inside the mansion shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was real, like a quiet current moving through the room. The woman straightened immediately, her smile stiff and forced. The man's expression changed too, confusion flickering across his face before settling into annoyance. And you are? The woman asked. The man glanced at Grace for a brief moment. Not to check her permission, just to acknowledge her. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. I'm here on behalf of Grace, he said calmly. Grace felt her spine straighten without her meaning to. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. For the first time since she'd walked into that house, she didn't feel completely alone. The man laughed once, short and dismissive. This has to be a joke. The visitor didn't respond to the laugh. He walked over to the table and placed the card down gently, like he had all the time in the world. The gold lettering caught the light. Attorney at law. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't cruel silence. It was tense, uncertain, the kind of quiet that makes people uncomfortable because they don't know what comes next. The woman leaned forward, squinting at the card. Her smile faded. What is this about? She asked, her voice tighter now. The man in the suit opened his briefcase slightly, just enough for the leather to creak. Papers inside. Organized. Prepared. He closed it again without taking anything out. That depends, he said calmly, on how this conversation goes. Grace stood by the doorway, her hands empty now, the cloth forgotten. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She watched the couple closely. She saw the shift in their posture. The way confidence slipped, just a little. The way power began to feel less certain. The man of the house crossed his arms. You can't just walk in here, and I can, the lawyer interrupted gently. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm. And I did. The room felt smaller again, but not in the same way. Now it felt like the walls were closing in on the people who had once felt untouchable. Grace met the lawyer's eyes for a brief second. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. A signal, a promise. The woman swallowed. This is unnecessary, she said quickly. If there's been a misunderstanding, there hasn't, the lawyer replied. Grace felt a strange calm settle over her. The years of swallowed anger were still there, but now they weren't pressing to explode. They were steady, grounded, waiting. The couple didn't know it yet. They were still clinging to their wealth, their status, their belief that money could fix anything. But something had already shifted. Something irreversible. Grace looked down at her worn shoes again. For the first time, they didn't feel like a mark of shame. They felt like proof. Proof of how far she'd walked. Proof of what she'd endured. And as the lawyer reached for his briefcase once more, the tension in the room thickened, hanging heavy in the air, ready to break. Because the real confrontation hadn't even begun yet. The laughter stopped. Not slowly. Not gently. It ended all at once, like someone had cut the sound out of the room with a blade. The air felt heavier after that. Thicker. The kind of stillness that makes people aware of their own breathing, their own heartbeat, their own fear. The lawyer stood near the table, calm and steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Authority lived in his posture, in the way his shoulders stayed relaxed, in the way his eyes met theirs without blinking, without flinching, without apology. He wasn't there to impress them. He was there to finish something. I'll be brief, he said. His voice was even, controlled. It carried across the room without effort. My client has documented evidence of workplace discrimination, verbal harassment, and wage violations. Grace felt the words settle into her chest like something solid. Like truth finally had weight. She stood a little taller now. Not dramatic. Not defiant. Just present. Her hands rested at her sides. Her shoulders squared. She didn't look at the floor anymore. The woman's smile twitched. Then cracked. "This is ridiculous," she said, letting out a nervous laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. "You can't be serious." The lawyer didn't respond right away. He reached into his briefcase slowly, deliberately, and placed a stack of papers on the table. The sound of them hitting the polished surface was soft, but it echoed louder than any shout. Photos slid into view. Printed emails. Audio transcripts. Dates neatly highlighted. Times circled in red. Names. Witness statements. Proof. Silence returned to the room. But this time, it wasn't cruel. This time, it was fear. The man leaned forward, scanning the documents too quickly, his jaw tightening with every second. The woman's fingers curled into the fabric of her robe. Her eyes darted from the papers to Grace, then back again, like she was seeing her for the first time and not liking what she found. "You mocked her appearance," the lawyer continued calmly. "You threatened her job. You created a hostile work environment. And you violated labor laws repeatedly." Each sentence landed clean, clear, impossible to dodge. The man's face reddened. Anger rushed in to replace his shock. He straightened up, puffing his chest, reaching for the only thing he had ever relied on. "Do you know who we are?" he snapped. The lawyer nodded once. "Yes," he said simply. "And the court will too." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Grace watched as something inside the couple shifted. The confidence they once wore like armor began to crack. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, in the way the man stopped pacing, in the way the woman stopped interrupting, in the way they both suddenly looked smaller in the room they owned. For years, Grace had been unseen, overlooked, talked over, reduced to a uniform and a role. But now, they were looking at her, really looking, not as a maid, not as someone beneath them, but as a woman who had stood still long enough for the truth to catch up. She hadn't fought with rage. She hadn't screamed or cursed or begged. She had fought with patience. She remembered the nights she sat at her small kitchen table after her son went to bed, writing things down in a worn notebook. Dates, times, words that still burned when she wrote them. She remembered recording her phone audio quietly in her pocket, her heart pounding as insults filled the room. She remembered doubting herself, wondering if it was worth it, wondering if anyone would ever care. Standing there now, she realized every moment of restraint had been a step toward this one. The woman shook her head, her voice rising. "This is extortion. We pay her well. We've done nothing wrong." The lawyer didn't argue. He didn't need to. He slid another document forward. A breakdown of hours worked. Overtime unpaid. Holidays ignored. Numbers didn't lie. And these numbers told a clear story. The man looked away first. His eyes drifted toward the window, toward the manicured lawn, toward anything that wasn't the truth sitting in front of him. The woman swallowed hard. Her breathing quickened. "This doesn't have to go any further," she said quickly. "We can handle this privately." Grace felt a quiet ache in her chest. Not fear, not anger, just clarity. For the first time, they weren't offering kindness. They were offering escape. The lawyer turned slightly toward Grace. "That will be her decision," he said. All eyes shifted to her. Grace felt the weight of the moment settle onto her shoulders. Years of silence pressed up against a single choice. She looked at the couple. She saw their wealth, their fear, their sudden politeness. And she saw something else too. A need to make this disappear. She thought of her son, of the lessons she wanted him to learn, of the way she wanted him to see himself in a world that often tried to shrink him. She didn't rush her answer. The lawyer met her eyes. His expression was calm, supportive. He trusted her. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Grace breathed in. Deep. Steady. The room waited. She met the couple's eyes one last time. Calm. Steady. Free. "Yes," she said. The word was soft, but it carried. And just like that, the power shifted. Not because voices were raised. Not because threats were made. But because the truth had finally been spoken out loud, and it couldn't be taken back. The man sank into his seat, rubbing his face with both hands. The woman stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Their world, built on control and silence, was cracking. Grace felt something loosen inside her. A tight knot she hadn't known how to untie. She didn't feel victorious. She felt whole. The lawyer gathered the documents slowly, returning them to his briefcase. "We'll be in touch," he said, his tone unchanged. Professional. Final. As he turned toward the door, Grace followed him, her steps light, but sure. She paused at the doorway and glanced back once more. Not with anger, not with pride, just with understanding. They didn't respond. They couldn't. Outside, the air felt different. Cleaner. Lighter. Grace stepped forward, the sound of her shoes against the floor steady and sure. The same shoes they had laughed at. The same shoes that had carried her through every moment of doubt. Power, she realized, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. And sometimes, it stands up quietly and tells the truth. And once that happens, nothing stays the same. Weeks later, the mansion was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after something has been taken away. Not stolen. Taken by truth. The chandeliers still hung from the ceiling. The marble floors still shined. The gates still stood tall and ironed with wealth. But the sound was gone. The laughter. The careless voices. The confidence that once echoed through every hallway like it belonged there forever. The house felt hollow now. The lawsuit moved fast. Faster than they expected. Faster than money could slow it down. Headlines followed. Not the kind they could buy their way out of. Not the flattering ones. Stories spread about mistreatment. About power abused behind closed doors. About a black maid who stood quietly while everything around her tried to crush her dignity. Settlements were paid. Large ones. Numbers that made accountants nervous and lawyers smile. Apologies were issued too. Carefully written. Carefully worded. Public ones read from stiff statements. Forced ones said through clenched teeth. Empty ones that sounded polished but carried no weight. Grace watched none of it on television. She didn't need to. She never returned to the mansion. Never stepped foot on that cold marble again. Never wiped another countertop under those chandeliers. She didn't need closure from a place that never saw her in the first place. Her life moved forward quietly. She moved into a small home across town. Not flashy, not grand, but warm. Sunlight filled the living room in the mornings. The walls didn't echo. They held sound. Laughter. Music. Peace. For the first time in a long time, Grace could breathe without feeling watched. She paid off old bills. Ones that had followed her for years like shadows. She set money aside for her son's future. College. Possibilities. Choices. The kind she never had growing up. And yes, she bought new shoes. Not expensive ones. Not designer names. Just strong. Clean. Comfortable. Shoes she chose because she wanted them. Shoes that fit her life now. When she laced them up, she didn't think about how they looked to anyone else. She thought about where they would take her next. Across the city, the mansion stayed quiet. The couple tried to return to normal. They hosted smaller gatherings. Smiled harder. Laughed louder. But something was missing. People whispered now. Guests glanced around more carefully. Conversations stopped when they entered rooms. Money still paid for things. It always did. But it couldn't buy back what was lost. They learned something no amount of wealth had ever taught them. Power without humanity collapses. Slowly. Publicly. And without mercy. They replayed moments in their heads. Words they once thought harmless. Laughter they once thought deserved. And now, every echo sounded different. Sharper. Heavier. Harder to ignore. Grace learned something too. Silence doesn't mean surrender. For years, she had been quiet because she had to be. Because survival demanded it. But silence, she realized, could also be strategy. It could be patience. It could be strength waiting for the right moment to stand up. She hadn't won by yelling. She hadn't won by fighting fire with fire. She won by watching. By recording. By trusting herself when the world told her she was small. By knowing that dignity doesn't need permission to exist. The lawyer checked in once more after everything was finalized. His voice sounded lighter. Relieved. You did good, he told her. Grace smiled. So did the truth, she said. Life settled into a new rhythm. Morning routines without dread. Evenings without exhaustion pressing down on her chest. Her son noticed the change before she did. You smile more now, he said one night at dinner. She paused, then nodded. I feel lighter, she answered honestly. The past didn't disappear. It never does. But it no longer defined her. It no longer controlled her steps. Sometimes, when she walked down the street in her new shoes, she thought about that day in the mansion. The laughter. The silence. The way she had stood there holding a cloth, feeling smaller than the room. She didn't feel anger when she remembered it. She felt clarity. Because that moment had been the turning point. Not when the lawyer walked in. Not when the papers hit the table. But when she decided, quietly, that she would not break. In the end, it wasn't the lawyer who defeated them. It was their own arrogance. Their belief that money made them untouchable. That power gave them permission. That silence meant acceptance. They were wrong. Grace never gave speeches, never chased attention. She didn't need applause. Her victory wasn't loud. It was lived. In the way she carried herself now. In the way she looked people in the eye. In the way she taught her son to stand tall, no matter where he stood. The world didn't change overnight. It never does. But one truth had been made clear. Never measure a person by what they wear. Never measure them by where they stand. Never measure them by how quietly they endure. Because the strongest people often wait patiently. They watch. They learn. They prepare. And when the moment comes, justice doesn't knock. It walks in.